Welcome to part 2 of PokePeak's Power Rankings for the VGC Draft League Season 9. Today we'll be reviewing the Champions Groups, aka Groups 5 through 8. We graded each of these teams based on 5 categories, the first being ease of execution, how easy we think the team is to pilot, the second being flexibility, or how varied the sets can be week to week within the team. Synergy is a third category, basically is there anything within the roster that helps Pokemon live up to their full potential. Fourth is perceived power, which is basically just how popular were the Pokemon that you picked in other groups. Lastly, we looked at the type chart for the team, both offensively and defensively. So how is your stab distribution? Are there anything that you're weak to? How good are your defensive pivots? Together, each of these 5 grades, we average into our overall scores. Kicking us off with Group 5, we have Mr. Wonton.
I think Whimsicott is one of the better tier ones. I'm really curious as to how these Pokemon around it are gonna work.
Yeah, I think you have some interesting possible modes here. Whimsicott, obviously, with Priority Tailwind and Disruption. You obviously have Speed Boost Coaching from Blaziken. Jolteon for the electric pivots. I mean, obviously, you have Prankster Rain Dance with Klefki. You do have that mode as well. You can play kind of a pseudo Sableye in that regard. Having no fake outs and no redirection, and being a hyper offensive roster that pretty much only has single target damage does feel like it's going to be pretty difficult to play. That being said, there is an insane amount of damage and the speed control is fantastic, but it's definitely not the most forgiving roster I've seen.
Yeah, I agree. We'll have to see how he plays it week by week.
Next we have Squirrely's team. So another Mega Floette team. He's paired it with Mega Lucario, Garchomp, and Hisuian Arcanine as notable partners.
Yeah, I mean, I think this team is very popular, as you can see by the perceived power. Like a lot, if not all, these Pokemon were picked in another group. I think you have some good value picks, like Mega Lucario for a tier 2, I think is really strong, and Vivillon for a tier 3. A few of these Pokemon I'm interested in seeing how he works with them, like Roserade and Malamar, but
yeah, I think Malamar is the cheapest Intimidate deterrent you can get. I don't even know if I would go as far as to say that it's real, though. You obviously have Mega Floette, you have Garchomp. That duo is very strong. I've said before, I think Vivillon is a very strong tier 3 if you want both Tailwind and redirection support, as well as Disruption with the Sleep Powder sets. I think that this team has a lot going for it, but I think that you have a lot of Sash users, and you have a lot of not the bulkiest Pokemon. One true redirector, relatively weak fake out support because it's not a pivotable fake out. So a lot of times you'll see these setup Pokemon with Incineroar, with Sneasler, who you can swap in and then fake out. Weavile, with all of its weaknesses, isn't the best at doing that. It's pretty much a lead fake out user. It's not a pivot fake out user. And so in that regard, I do feel like it's going to be a little bit difficult to keep the tempo up with Floette if you lose Vivillon early, for example. But obviously this team has a lot of power in it. It's just a matter of if you're going to be able to execute and if you're going to be able to get the type matchups that you want on the field, because you just don't have the raw bulk to deal with matchups where you don't have type advantage.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's just, he has a lot of strong Pokemon, and a lot of them do work pretty well together.
On we have your team, Hunter, the Sunny Shore Solar Surge.
My team captain is Mega Pyroar, of course. I really wanted to use it this season. I used it a little bit on ladder. My first pick was Aerodactyl. I think it's the best tier 2 Pokemon in the format. Overall, it's just a decent standard Sun team. I think I have some good value picks with Diggersby, Ariados, and even Quaquaval and next to Lopunny. I think can be very strong. Intimidate with Staraptor, and I have Mega Meowstic because you can run either Meowstic. I think even not pressing the Mega button on that thing can be very strong.
Yeah, and obviously I reviewed Group 5 as a whole, and so a couple of my notes for your team from an outside perspective was just that obviously it's really frail, and so if you ever get behind on tempo or you lose weather control or you lose the speed advantage, you don't really have that many defensive pivots. You also don't have great fake out support outside of the Lopunny mode, and so that can be a little bit problematic where if you're trying to set up but it's not a good Lopunny week, it might be a little bit difficult. And then you don't have any Trick Room mode or explicit Trick Room answers on this team other than Imprison Trick Room from Meowstic and maybe Final Gambit from Staraptor, removing the Trick Room user. And so I think obviously the Torkoal Sunroom team is a little bit more flexible, but this is obviously more hyper offensive. And so I think it's just a matter of if you can keep control of the game, this roster feels great at punishing and making the opponent play to you. But if you ever lose control, it does feel like it might be a little bit difficult to get back.
Yeah, I mean, it fits like exactly how I want to play. I want to predict and I want to hit hard. If I can read my opponent, I think there's not going to be many games where it's going to be rough for me.
Next up, we have Mahoney's team. So he's running Mega Meganium with some notable tier 2s here as well. So obviously, a lot of people picked Milotic. A lot of people picked Volcarona. There's a lot of value packed into this, but I'm not sure I'm sold on the Mega Meganium.
Yeah, I mean, when MA first came out on Champions, Mega Meganium was probably my favorite Mega to use. I thought it was really strong, and then it just fell out of meta. I think it's too slow. Like, it hits pretty hard, and obviously its ability is really nice with Weather Ball and Solar Beam. But you do also have another tier 1 Pokemon here in Dragapult, which I also think is not the strongest tier 1.
Yeah, it's extremely flexible in what it can do. Obviously, you can run Screens Dragapult, you can run Willow Dragapult, you can run
It is
Physical, you
a
can
lot
run
better at
Special,
draft.
but none of those sets are inherently broken. They're all very honest sets, and so while it's really flexible and it can fulfill a lot of roles, it's never going to overpower the opponent. And I kind of feel the same way about Mega Meganium. I feel like it's very honest and straightforward in the sets that it's going to be bringing, because if you're not abusing its ability, it's really not that good, and so you can only pick moves that do abuse that ability. Because of that, it's not the best Mega, in my opinion, and it's not the most flexible. But that being said, the flexibility of the rest of the roster is so good
Yeah.
that maybe they can make up for it.
Yeah, I mean, we'll definitely see. It's gonna be a little rough because every week he is bringing Mega Meganium.
Yeah, exactly. So I think if any trades were going to be made, I would like to see them pick up a secondary Mega, even if it's lower tier, just for prep purposes. There's a lot of good Megas in tier 3 and tier 4 that are relatively cheap, and you do have a few redundancies on this roster where I don't necessarily think this is the best Zoroark team. Like you said, Dragapult isn't the strongest. Maybe we could look for another tier 1 Mega to complement the roster. But overall, I think it's a really strong team, but I think it's strong because of the non-Megas, not because of Mega Meganium. Next up, we have the Metagross Mashers by Gavin.
If you look at this team, it just screams like easiness. You have tied with the fastest Pokemon in the game with Mega Aerodactyl. You have a tier 0 and Mega Metagross, so it's going to be pretty difficult to prep for those each week. There's a couple question marks I have here. Like, I'm not exactly sure what Vileplume does with this team. I think you could trade maybe Samurai or Toxapex, and I think they don't do the same thing, but they have like similar typing. And I like overall this team looks pretty easy to play, but I think it doesn't have like the best synergy or flexibility.
I agree. I think what you gain in ease of execution, you lose in relative power. Mega Aerodactyl is obviously really easy to play because of its speed tier. Pikachu is a great lightning rod support for it. You do have weather control. You do have Toxapex as a bulky pivot and something that can lock the opponents in. Metagross is obviously one of the easier Megas that you can play because of its bulk and speed and its access to stab priority moves and screen break. There's a lot of really easy tools on this team to where you don't actually have to prep that much for things. You're always going to have access to a Tailwind. You're always going to have access to screen break and weather control. I think the only hard part about this team is Zoroark, because you do have a couple abilities that activate on spawn. Obviously, Drampa, Cloud9, you get an indicator for. Ninetales, if there's no weather, you can see, obviously. But overall, this team is really easy to play, and I think it's going to lead to a lot of situations where if the player skill is the same, you probably come out on top with this team just because it's so easy.
Yeah, I agree. Only other thing I'll say is he has no fake out or like easy tailwinds, but you are the fastest Pokemon in the game, so
Pikachu isn't the worst explicitly with Aerodactyl because of Lightning Rod. I do kind of like that as a lead, but I agree. You, like we said with Squirrely's
it's not the
team,
strongest.
right? And you have no pivotable fake out. It's so frail that
Yeah.
if you're in a spot where you need a fake out on the field, you can't protect swapping your fake out user very safely, and so that can lead to some situations where if you are down tempo, you don't have the ability to get it back that easily. Next, we have the Calgary Magcargos with I Don't Give a Chuck.
Obviously I'm in the same group as this guy, and when he was drafting, I knew that he was going like hard Trick Room. Like this is you do not play anything other than Trick Room with this team. I do like that you have two very strong fake outs, and you have a Trick Room setter that is not very easy to get rid of in Oranguru. It has inner focus. It's pretty bulky. I think the team synergy is very good, but if you play against this team, you know exactly what he's gonna do.
Yeah, obviously, like you said, great fake out support, and Oracle, obviously one of the best non mega Trick Room sweepers in the format, paired with one of the best partners for it in Oranguru since it can instruct double eruption. I think the fact that you have Oranguru as your Trick Room setter makes it easier to play with the slower fake outs, because like Farigiraf, it itself can't be faked out because of inner focus, and so it makes it easier to get that Trick Room set up consistently. And for a budget pick of tier 3, there's really not a better option here with what you have on the team. Yeah, obviously everybody knows that Trick Room is coming with this team. It's just a matter of, do you have the tools to stop it, and do you have the tools to stop people from stopping it? So Imprison is going to be a big deal against this team. Most Imprison Trick Room users are going to be Psychic types. Maybe Scrafty can take care of those. Overall, this team is super inflexible, but what it's good at, it's great at.
It is very strong under Trick Room, and the synergy works very well.
Next up, we have Bottle Ducky's team.
Yeah, I mean, he spent his biggest tiers on Mega Pokemon, and I think they are obviously Sableye is very strong outside of Mega, but like these three Pokemon are not the strongest Mega Pokemon in draft, in my opinion. They're just hard to use, I think. Obviously, Electros can run special or physical, so that is like you really don't know what it's going to run week by week. But Venusaur, you kind of know exactly like what it's going to run. To me, this team just screams like bulky screens. There's not many other options. You have two Tailwind users, but they're pretty slow, so they're not like very reliable Tailwind users. Yeah, I mean overall the team, these Pokemon are pretty easy to use, but I worry about a few of the cons.
Yeah, their bulk is obviously really forgiving. Having Sableye to set screens is really forgiving. Like you said, this Sableye is the Mega version, so you don't have Light Clay, so it's a little bit more difficult to use in that regard. You do have good pivots. Obviously, Venusaur is only weak to two things. You have multiple pivots that can pivot into that. Electros has no weaknesses, which makes it relatively easy to play, especially behind screens. But it's just a matter of if you have enough damage to actually get through the opponent. I worry about something like a Mega Floette with redirection support that can just spam Calm Minds and then sustain through this roster's low damage output.
Another thing is just you have a single fake out in Cibula, and it's also your screens user. So I feel like a lot of this team is riding on the back of Sableye, and it also can't hold an item. But overall, I think most of these Pokemon are pretty easy to use. It's just these Pokemon aren't very flexible. They kind of run the same stuff, so it'll be interesting to see how he uses this team.
I do think having access to both Tailwind and Trick Room with relatively reliable sources, Aromatisse can't be Encored or Taunted. Corviknight is extremely bulky, and so it's able to set Tailwind pretty reliably. You do have Wide Guard support from the Araquanid. Both of these Megas are at a speed tier where they can run in Trick Room or Tailwind. I think it's extremely easy to play because you just pick what you want to do and do it, but it's just a matter of if that will actually get the job done or not.
I agree.
Next up, we have That Nintendo Guy's team, and he is running 4 Megas. So we have Mega Blaziken, Mega Golurk, Mega Raichu Y, and Mega Dragalge.
I look at this team and I see like two different modes of Tailwind and Trick Room. The only issue is that your single Tailwind setter is a tier 5 Pokemon. So I think most of the time he's going to be looking to play under Trick Room with Dragalge and Golurk, but Mega Raichu Y and Mega Blaziken are fast enough to where they can run outside of Tailwind, like they don't need it. Same with like Scarf Vanillux, Scarf Rotom-Mow, and Palafin and Crocodile they're decently fast as well. So this is a fast team.
Yeah. Scarf Crocodile is also fantastic. Palafin obviously has Jet Punch as its signature move, which is better Aqua Jet, which can circumvent speed control altogether. I think, like you said, this team is very fast, and this team is also very slow, and so having to prep for both of these modes is really difficult, because if you're going to try to get Tailwind up to get ahead of Mega Blaziken, and then he sets Trick Room on you, you're going to be in a bad time. So I think the hardest part about this team for that Nintendo guy is going to be ease of execution, because trying to cram both modes into a stack of 6 Pokemon on a given week is going to be really difficult. And so I feel like you might have to pick one or the other. But if you do have the ability to mesh these modes, it's going to be a really good team, but it's not going to be easy to do that.
I've been saying this for every team, but your single fake out user is your Mega Pokemon and Raichu. So it might be, especially when you're trying to set up Tailwind, it might be a little difficult to set up Tailwind with Toucannon if you do decide to bring it, because you only have a single fake out and Toucannon's not the strongest Pokemon, so it won't be able to live too many hits. That's why I think Mimikyu and Trick Room is a bit better for this team, because obviously it can take a single hit with its ability.
Yeah, the other thing I'd like to see too is some redirection on this team, because Mega Blaziken and Mega Raichu Y are so frail, but like you said, they're so fast that they can operate independent of Tailwind, but there's no redirection for them on this team. Mega Blaziken, a lot of the times you'll see with an explicit redirector, because all it needs is you to buy turns for it. Mega Raichu Y, all it needs is you to buy turns for it to paralyze the enemy, and then Tailwind doesn't matter. In this instance, you have no redirection support, and so I think that makes it significantly harder to play, on top of the fact that, like you said, your only Tailwind is Toucannon, and so you also have a decision to make there. Do I even bring Tailwind because this Pokemon is so weak, or do I feel like I need it even though it's so weak?
Yeah, I mean, we'll just have to see what he does. I know that he's played in a few seasons of this draft league, so he's been around the block. We'll see what he does.
Here we have Empress Lily's team, so a Mega Aggron and Mega Staraptor team.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of what the teams want to do, I think this is pretty similar to the last one. Obviously, the Pokemon are very different, but you can run 2 different modes here. Like, you have a strong Tailwind mode and a strong Trick Room mode. I think Sinistcha, outside of a few Pokemon like Whimsicott, is Staraptor's like favorite support, and it works really well with Farigiraf and Aggron as well.
Yeah, I think Sinistcha and Aggron are probably ideal partners for each other. Farigiraf, we established, one of the best tier 2s and easily the best Trick Room setter in the format. Part of what I don't like about this team is that if you are running a Tailwind mode, Staraptor kind of has to set it for itself here. And if you're going with the Trick Room mode, your fake out users are extremely fast, and so you don't actually have a reliable way to get Trick Room up outside of just tanking hits.
I think if you can like set up Tailwind and Trick Room, that this team can get it can get out of hand pretty easily. Like, these are Pokemon that are very easy to use. You kind of just hit what's in front of you. And obviously Sinistcha is probably the best redirector in the format. So it's very easy for Staraptor or Aggron to get very strong very quickly.
Now we have It's Bugs team, which looks like a rain team.
Pretty sure he was last pick in my group, so he just drafted Rain instantly. I do worry about this team's meta options. I think they are very weak. Sceptile and Absol being your only megas, I'm not the biggest fan of. I know Arceludon and Rain is very strong, almost like a mega Pokemon, but I worry about teams like getting rid of Rain and then your team is just limp.
It's very similar to one of the teams that we reviewed in the showdown groups, where it feels very all in on Rain, and you don't have many modes outside of that. I'm someone who picked Mega Sceptile myself. I think it's very good, but I agree that it's very one-dimensional in how it plays. I think that this team gives Rotom a little bit more flexibility, but Rotom isn't that strong of a pick to add that flexibility to. I agree, I would like to see them add maybe a stronger Mega, maybe in place of the Talonflame, for example, because you already have strong Tailwind support from your Pelipper, who can also set up the Rain, and I don't like that there's no fake out support.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty easy to deny Tailwind against this team, I think. You can break Gale Wings very easily. Pelipper's pretty slow for a Tailwind setter. I mean, there's a lot of speed control here, but it's pretty difficult to get up. Other than that, I think this team is pretty easy to use. It's just a standard Rain team with Arch and Pelipper, and you do have some discharge options with Sceptile and Lightning Rod, and you got the Beartic as well, which I'm a fan of.
Yeah, my other main issue with this team is that you only have one Rain setter with so many pieces reliant on Rain being up. And so I would like to see, for example, a Prankster Rain user. Maybe if you could have gotten something like a Liepard in Tier 3, I think that would be significantly better. Obviously, you do have Talonflame, who's a fast Pokemon with access to Rain Dance, but I just worry about the instances where you can't consistently keep Rain up. This team feels like it's going to lose a lot of its power.
I also think this team is pretty weak to opposing Trick Room modes.
I agree. This team operates very fast, and it doesn't really have slow modes. Your slowest Pokemon probably being Beartic outside of Rain. I also don't think that there are any Imprison Trick Room users on this team.
No, there's not.
And without Fake Out support, you're probably going to struggle a lot of the time.
I agree, but we'll see.
All right, kicking us off with Group 6, we have Damage's team. Another Mega Gengar team, and he's paired it with Mega Skarmory.
Yeah, I mean, I mainly did the rankings for this group. Skarmory and Garchomp are a pretty good pairing for just like earthquake scenarios, and then you have obviously you have a decent Perish Trap angle with a couple fake outs and Intimidate. You have double Intimidate, and you have just a strong Pokemon in Garchomp. So in terms of playability, this team seems pretty easy to use.
Yeah, I mean, you know me, I'm a big fan of Mega Gengar, I'm a big fan of Tinkaton, and I think that combo is pretty strong. You have a cheaper fake out option in the Blastoise, whereas like I have the Incin on my team, but it's still double fake out with Gengar, which I think is great. Like you said, Garchomp Skarmory is great. Skarmory is also at that speed tier of 110, where as a Tailwind setter for Garchomp, it can help it outspeed some of these other things like Alolan Ninetales at 109. I think overall this team has a lot of flexibility. I think some of these picks are a little bit out of place for me. Like the Gallade, for example, I feel like is going to be kind of difficult to use because you don't have that much support. Like there's no true redirector here outside of Scovillain, who is pretty much locked to Sash most of the time.
Like I said, overall, this team is fairly strong. It has a lot of popular picks. It has a bit of a ground weakness, and overall, it's pretty frail. But I think generally this team will be easy to use, and it has some flexibility per week.
Next up, we have the Unknown United. So he's got Mega Aerodactyl and Mega Ampharos alongside some pretty high value non-megas.
This is a very Trick Room heavy team. I wrote down that Aerodactyl kind of has no place here because a lot of these Pokemon only operate in Trick Room. They don't operate only in Trick Room, but it's their best mode. Torkoal and Steelix and even Avalugg. So I just worry about them being too slow with the fastest Mega Pokemon in the game. Like I don't think a Tailwind really will matter that much.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of speed sandwich comps where you have the fastest of the fast and the slowest of the slow for both Trick Room and Tailwind modes. But I agree with you. I do think that this team is a little bit too skewed towards Trick Room. Like I think, for example, you don't necessarily need Torkoal, Araquanid, Steelix, and Ampharos for Trick Room options. I think one of those could be switched, like even Araquanid as your tier 3, I think could easily be switched to a Mon that can maybe facilitate a little bit better in the Tailwind mode, because your Trick Room mode is pretty hard locked to Kangaskhan for Torkoal +1. And so I don't necessarily think you need these other picks. And I think you could facilitate Aerodactyl's mode a little bit more, given that it is your tier 1 mega, right? Your tier 4 mega, the cheaper option, is the one that fits better with the speed tiering of the rest of the team. And so I would like to see a little bit more support towards that higher cost option because you are paying such a bigger price for that.
Another thing I will say is this team has 6 ground weaknesses. So if we see him play against the Garchomp team that we just saw, it might be pretty difficult to deal with, especially when all of your Pokemon are going to be slower. I would like to see a few changes with this team. I think Mega Aerodactyl and Farigiraf can work well together, but I think it's just too slow for Aerodactyl.
I agree. Aerodactyl specifically really wants non-mega options to utilize how fast it is, and this just doesn't have it. Obviously, your Sunroom mode, fantastic. I think Torkoal, Farigiraf, Vileplume as a core is great. I think it's just about meshing out the other options outside of that mode because they do feel a little lackluster. We have the Indianapolis Iron Hands piloted by Cactus Way.
I think this is the first Mega T-Tor that we have seen, so it's pretty interesting. I think if you look at this team, it has a lot of Pokemon that are kind of difficult to use, like Reuniclus, Sableye without an item, I think with Basculegion and Mega T-Tar being your only sweepers and like only form of real damage, like Infernape can help as well. But outside of that, this team is pretty weak in my opinion.
I agree, and you do have some options, right? Like Dragon Dance T-Tar sets do make it a more threatening sweeper. You do have bulk up sets on Corviknight, but I do worry about this team's ability to actually get those boosts and get that setup going before the sweep happens, because these Pokemon by themselves are not actually strong enough to complete those sweeps without setup. Basculegion really needs its partners to die first, but the game could be completely out of your hands by the time that Last Respects has a few stacks on it, or Tyranitar has a quad weakness where you don't have the cop out of taking a Chople Berry on the base form because you have to hold your Megastone. And so I do worry about this team's ability to get going, and it doesn't feel like it has the greatest speed control options. Corviknight's a really slow Tailwind. You have Pokemon that aren't necessarily the slowest within Trick Room, and so a lot of this falls on Ariados. I think Ariados is a good support for Mega T-Tar because of that quad fighting resist, but I just don't know if Ariados can hold this team together because, like you said, there's a lot of volatility within the roster.
Yeah, it'll definitely be interesting to see what he really does here. Like you said, the slow Tailwind and not the easiest or best Trick Room mode. So we'll have to see.
The other thing that bothers me a little bit about this team is if you're committing to Mega T-Tar as your tier 0, you're essentially saying, I'm going to keep Sand up, but there really aren't great Sand abusers on this team. I would love to see an Excadrill, a Houndstone, even something like a Mega Steelix as a secondary option where maybe somebody doesn't bring weather control into you and you can say, okay, I'm going to have Sandstorm up anyway, let me get some damage option with the Sand Force. But there's just no Sand abusers here outside of T-Tar itself, and so it doesn't really feel like it's worth the tier 0 price to me. Next, we have Running Ronin with a Mega Emboar and Mega Raichu Y team.
This team it's okay. I think you have some redirection with Sinistcha. You have Priority Tailwind. You have a couple mons that could be pretty difficult to use with Zoroark and Goodra and even Garg here. So, and you have a big ground weakness again. I think this team, it's gonna be a little difficult to use.
Yeah, I agree. It feels like a lot of the things for this team, there's nothing glaringly bad about it, but there's also nothing glaringly good. It feels below average in a lot of ways. I think having Priority Tailwind is great, but something like Mega Raichu doesn't necessarily need Tailwind. It needs redirection and fake out support. Something like Mega Emboar probably isn't fast enough to operate in Tailwind modes most of the time, and so I do worry that a lot of these higher tier picks outside of Sinistcha might not be the best supportive options for the megas that have been chosen. And like you have noted, they're not even the strongest megas within their respective tiers as is. And so it does feel like the team overall might be a little low in power. But that being said, these are Pokemon that you probably haven't seen much. And so maybe it's going to throw some people off guard in prep, especially early on in the season where not everybody's going to know what these things do. But I think as the season goes on and as people learn how this team operates, I think it's going to be kind of difficult to, especially with Pokemon as inflexible as Raichu Y that have very fixed movesets, catch people off guard in a draft format.
I've said this a ton, but you have a lot of like flexibility with some of these Pokemon because people don't know like what a lot of them do. So it will be very interesting to see this team.
Yeah, I expect this team to get some wins in the early season, but I expect them to struggle a little bit more as the season goes on, just because other people that have more complex teams are going to ramp up throughout the season. And a team like this, where its real strength is in its unknowns, once those are known quantities, it does feel like it loses significant power. Next up in Group 6, we have the Tailwind Tribunal, piloted by Zufo. So obviously, I helped Austin with this team. I think it's a pretty straightforward tail room setup team. You have Mega Kangaskhan, which is really good at facilitating. Like we talked about Blastoise earlier in the showdown video, Kangaskhan is really flexible in that fake out Tailwind, fake out Trick Room, fake out plus setup Mon next to it. They're all very easy linear lines to play. And so I think that this team is pretty easy. Incin, obviously one of the best fake out supports in the format. I think As I've said, I think Vivillon is fantastic because it not only provides disruption with its sleep powder sets, it has rage powder, it has tailwind, it has decent damage with Compound Eyes Hurricane. I think that on the surface, this team might look a little weak, but I think where it loses out in power, its ease of execution and synergy, I think, is extremely high.
I agree. Like you said, this team seems fairly easy to pilot. I do worry about some of these Pokemon being a little too slow to use Tailwind with Vivillon. Another issue I kind of have with this team is you only have two Trick Room setters, and in my opinion, while they're not the weakest of the Trick Room setters, I don't think they're the strongest either. So it might be a little difficult to get it up in some matchups. But you do have Triple Fake Out, you do have Intimidate, and you have pretty bulky Pokemon across the board. I just worry about if you want to run Trick Room one week, depending on what your opponent has, it could be a little difficult. And with you being not the fastest team outside of Trick Room, it's gonna be a little difficult some weeks.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. And I think that a lot of these Pokemon are relatively inflexible in what they can do. You know what Instin's going to do most of the time. You know what Primarina is going to do most of the time. Como can go physical or special, but for the most part, it's a Clangorous Soul setup sweeper. Obviously, it can run Scarf, it can run some other sets. Vivillon is kind of locked to Scarf or Sash. And then, like you said, the Trick Room mode, the sequencing is going to be a little bit difficult, but I think for the value of these picks, like Golurk only being a tier 3, Slowbro Galar only being a tier 4, I think adding that element to prep can make this team a little bit harder to prep for. And I also think that because Mega Kangaskhan is so consistent, you don't necessarily have to lean on that mode very often, but there are definitely going to be some matchups where you do want to.
I agree, and I'm a big fan of these mega options. They're some of the my favorite megas in the game, so they'll be interesting.
Next up, we have the Shalor City Sylveons. So another Mega Floette team, and they've interestingly paired it with Mega Altaria.
Yeah, this is like a pseudo rain team. You don't have a ton of great rain options here though. You have Heliolisk, and that's kind of it. Obviously you have water types, but they don't necessarily do too much in or outside of rain. You have one of the strongest Mega Pokemon in the game with Mega Floette, but I do think that its other Mega on the team doesn't really mesh well with how Altaria or Floette want to play the game. So I'm not the biggest fan of this team, but I think it's going to be decently easy to use, and you do have good weather control.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think this is one of those teams where they kind of had an idea of what they wanted to do going into the draft, and then Mega Floette for some reason fell into their lap. And I think rather than trying to abandon this rain strategy that they had in their head, maybe they just grabbed the Mega Floette and then said, well, it's strong enough to pair with anything. I'm just going to go with the mode that I was planning on going. Like you said, there aren't really that many rain abusers on this team. Azumarill is great, but you don't have any redirection for the setup on this team. Sharpedo is great, but you don't have any fake out support for it to get those speed boosts off and to potentially get some setup down. I think something like Skeledirge feels a little out of place where it's a bit of an overlap on the niche of bulky setup special attacker. Like, I struggle to see games where you're going to bring Skeledirge and Floette or Skeledirge over Floette. And then some of these other options are a little bit interesting as well, where Heliolisk, you mentioned, it does get the dry skin ability, so it's okay with rain teams, but it's definitely better suited for sun teams with solar power. Something like Fortress is fine in the rain because it mitigates its fire weakness, but in doubles, it doesn't really get much done outside of that. I think overall, this team has strong pieces, but I don't think that they necessarily mesh well together. And I think because you do have some strong components here, I think that this team can be good, but I do think some trades need to be made to kind of support this tier 0 mega option that you've chosen, because what is here is lacking on that front. Next up, we have Mimi's team, Arc of the X, with Raichu Mega X and Steelix as the megas.
I mean, this is another team with Whimsicott. I think Whimsicott, I've said it before, one of the best Tier 1 Pokemon in the game. You pair it with a Mega Raichu X, which isn't one of the strongest Megas in Tier 1, but it could definitely work in some matchups. You have like a couple different modes here. You do have some slow Pokemon where you can run Trick Room. But you do have triple fake out and some fast mons for your tailwind mode. I just wonder about your Steelix mode here.
Yeah, so Whimsicott and Gengar both do get Trick Room, but those are the only two on the roster, and unfortunately, those are Pokemon that don't really want to be in Trick Room. And so you end up in this situation where if you want to go the Trick Room mode, your sequencing becomes very difficult to use, especially considering the fact that if you want to use Mega Steelix, Mega Raichu is one of your fake outs, but that lowers its value if it can't click Mega. Lopunny is another fake out, but again, extremely fast and a tier 5. And Liepard is another fake out, but it's also fast and doesn't want to operate in Trick Room. And so the Trick Room mode, once you get there, has fine damage options in the Steelix and the Drampaw, but it just doesn't feel like the sequencing is possible.
I agree. I do think that with this team being so fast, though, like your non-trick room mode is going to be pretty easy, especially with you having 3 fake outs and one being your mega Pokemon. I think a lot of these Pokemon are really good beside Milotic and Quaquaval, especially with Raichu getting Lightning Rod before Mega evolving, and just Prankster Tailwind, Prankster Encore from 2 Pokemon. I think it's going to be really disruptive, and I think overall this team is pretty easy to use.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think it's going to be one of those teams where, like you said, it has an insane amount of disruption tools, but maybe not the most damage. And from somebody who is in a very similar boat, it's not always as straightforward. Sometimes you have to leverage those, and then in matchups where you're not able to leverage those and you have to lean back on raw damage or on your type chart, it is going to feel a little bit difficult with a team like this just because there really is no real sweeper and your mega options are relatively weak given the composition.
I agree, but you can definitely make this team work with some of these picks around the mega Pokemon.
Yeah, I agree. And like you said, ease of execution on this one is going to be pretty easy.
Mm.
Raichu Mega X has the flexibility of being either a special attacker with rising voltage or a physical attacker. Milotic obviously protects the physical side, and then with double prankster users and follow me redirection, this team does feel like it's the skill floor definitely feels pretty high. So next we have Kimmy's team, which was actually the most popular team in that it crammed in the highest amount of unanimous and popular picks of any team in the entire draft out of both groups.
This is another team to me where it's a hard Trick Room team with a fast Tailwind setter that a lot of these Pokemon can't really utilize Tailwind very well. You have Mega Mawile as your tier 0. I think it's pretty easy to say that if you want to pick that, you want to run Trick Room. You have probably the best value Trick Room setter in the format with Oranguru being a tier 3. You have Scrafty. You have another Mega Pokemon that can be run in Trick Room, but outside of a few of these Pokemon, I think it's going to be really hard for them to run anything other than Trick Room with Aerodactyl and Volcarona and even Mamoswine being a little fast.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Aerodactyl and Mamoswine kind of feels like your duo outside of Trick Room, but it really becomes odd to where it really becomes difficult to determine when you bring that and how it can mesh with the other 4 Pokemon that you're bringing on a given week. Like you said, this is a hard Trick Room team. It does have the option of playing screens with Grimmsnarl, but none of these Pokemon are inherently super bulky. Mega Mawile is pretty frail on the special side. Scrafty obviously is bulky but has a quad weakness. Volcarona likewise is bulky but has a quad weakness. And so it does feel like outside of your Trick Room mode, your options are very limited.
I agree. I do like some of these Pokemon around Mawile though. Like, I like the double fake out. I do think Dragalge as a secondary mega option was pretty good for its tiering. And you do have some like Earthquake options with Aerodactyl, even though I'm not the biggest fan of it with this team, like Memo and Arrow. And then you have Rage Powder, you have Intimidate, you have Double Fake Out. I think it's going to be hard for this team to play some weeks, especially because it's so reliant on Trick Room. But overall, like we said before, the power of this team is pretty strong.
Yeah, they were definitely able to pack very popular picks into this roster and picks that many people wanted. So it might be an instance of value over composition, but I think we've established the Trick Room mode is very strong, and so it's going to force people to play to them. And if they understand how Trick Room works and understand what the counters are, they might be able to pull off a significant amount of wins just based on sheer strength.
I agree.
Next up, we have the California Charizards with a Mega Venusaur, Mega Charizard Y team. So this is a bit interesting because Venusaur can operate on multiple levels here. We've seen a couple iterations of Venusaur teams at in-person events where you can run Mega Venusaur with Rain, or you can run base Venusaur as an option alongside Charizard in the Sun, and I think it's a pretty interesting concept. But I do think we have a lot of different team archetypes shoved into one, and so it does feel like it might be a little difficult to play on that front.
I agree. I mean, I am someone that I actually ran Mega Venusaur, Mega Charizard Y, and Gyarados on one of my ladder teams. I think it was at late MA regulation. So I do like these Pokemon together. I do worry about Mega Venusaur being a kind of a weak Mega in draft, but it could definitely work some weeks where Mega Charizard Y will not be able to come. A few of these Pokemon, like you said, don't really work well with those three, though. I think Rotom Frost and Beartic are kind of outliers here in which they want to run in snow, but there's no snow setter here outside of Snowscape from Slowking.
Yeah, I think that Mega Venusaur is one of those Pokemon that can play in snow just due to the fact that it is so bulky. It does really like the screens of Aurora Veil. The inverse type matchup of one of its two weaknesses being flying makes ice types really great with it, but that doesn't have any synergy here because you have no snow setter, you have no Aurora Veil user, and so to bring snow abusers with no real snow setter, it does feel like you're wasting some of your budget, and it's also contradictory when you have a tier 0 who wants to play only in Sun.
And I think that can come back to bite them as well. Like a lot of these Pokemon are weak to fire typing, and if you set up the sun yourself, I think it could be really rough for you.
Yeah, absolutely. You have four grass types, and if Venusaur is coming as a base Venusaur, not only does it have no sash, it also doesn't have access to that thick fat ability, and it's weak as well. And then you also have Rotom Frost and Beartic, which, if you end up in situations where they're stuck in the sun, are also weak to fire. And so, like you said, this team, well being good pairings for a sun mode, is actually very weak to sun inherently.
This is a very rough team to use. It's going to be really hard unless they make a few changes within the coming weeks.
The speed control is lackluster. You don't have any redirection. You have little to no fake out support. You do have priority block, but your Pokemon aren't the fastest either. I agree. I think this team is. It has some strong qualities to it, but I think at the end of the day, it has some real big Achilles heels, and it is not going to be easy to play. And I worry about it as the season goes on. Next up, we have Tokei's team, the Bolton Boulders. So we have a dual Mega Metagross and Dragalge team here.
Here you have Metagross. It's a strong tier 0 Pokemon. You have some decent fake out around it with Grimmsnarl, Simisage, and Blastoise. Other than that, I do worry about this team's speed control with Scarlet and Volcarona being your tailwind setters. Volcarona at least is not the bulkiest Pokemon, but it could definitely help set up tailwind. And I think Skarmory is pretty weak compared to the Pokemon in its tier. So I think overall this team is pretty strong, but it has a few issues.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Your only Trick Room setter being a Spathra makes the Trick Room side of it very difficult. Like you said, the Tailwind setters aren't particularly strong. It feels like this is going to prey a lot on natural speed and bulk more than anything. You do have two speed boost Pokemon, so that can help a little bit. Something like a Blaziken that gets one speed boost and has access to Coaching or Rock Tomb at essentially a Scarf level of speed can be really good. You do have the redirection in the Volcarona. You do have screens with Grimmsnarl. So I think that this team can leverage a lot of its natural speed and natural bulk in that regard. But at the end of the day, you don't have that hard, I'm going to click a button and I'm going to be fast. And so I think that can come back to bite you in some of the matchups against hyper offensive teams where You don't necessarily have the luxury of playing low and slow. You don't have the luxury of getting your screen set up and then getting a parting shot, or having your protect turns with Blaziken and then getting a coaching off on your Mega Metagross. It really feels like this team is going to come down to how much damage your opposition has and whether or not you're able to hold them off and play to your natural bulk and natural speed, or if they're just going to be able to roll you over before you can kind of get going in that regard.
Yeah, I agree. We'll definitely have to see.
Next up, we have Trim's team.
Another Mega Gengar team paired alongside Garchomp, and then you have the Mega Failings.
Yeah, so Mega Phalanx is actually something that I recommended to Trim with this draft just because I thought that Garchomp needed a slightly harder Intimidate deterrent than the Corviknight. With that being said, though, I do think his non-Mega Core is very strong, but I do worry a little bit about Mega Gengar on a team like this. It feels very similar to something like Jackie's team, where this team doesn't have that much support behind it. It has a lot of bulky damage dealers, and so I do worry about the overall composition against some stronger teams, but you do have great value across the board here.
I didn't, obviously, you helped or you talked to Trim about this team. I wonder if this team would be better with another Tier 0 Mega. Obviously, you don't want to let anyone else in your group get Mega Gengar, but I agree. I think it's not out of place here, but you could definitely pick more Pokemon that are better suited around it.
Like, for example, I think Mega Delphox would go perfectly with this team. It gives you a Levitate besides Garchomp. It gives you a better setup Mon besides Vivillon's Rage Powder mode. But obviously, that's not the case with this team. They do have Mega Gengar, and I think that it can work just because of how strong and how flexible it is. But I do think that the non-Mega core of this team is really what shines, not the Mega components.
I agree. There's a lot of good value picks here.
Next up, we have Al's team, which I think is the first Mega Alakazam that we've seen, paired alongside Mega Blaziken.
I mean, I look at this team and I just see a lot of fast Pokemon. You have Alakazam is speed tied with Mega Aerodactyl as the fastest Pokemon in the game. And then you have Speed Boost, Blaziken. Meowscarada is very like fast, base speed. Scarf Goldango, and then you have some priority block with Serena. The only issue I have, or I mean, there's a couple, but the biggest issue I have is your Tailwind Setter being a tier 5 in 2 cannon, and I think most weeks that thing will not be coming. And then while you are very fast, if your opponent uses Tailwind themselves or has Electro Web or Icy Wind or something to help with speed control, it could be a little rough.
Yeah, I agree. This is definitely a hyper offense team that's going to try to keep the pressure on and keep that Tailwind at bay. It does have things like, for example, Prankster Thunder Wave from Meowstic to mitigate some of that speed. I think that a team like this can work well. Obviously, Mega Blaziken with Serena is great. Obviously, Meowstic and Alakazam is a fantastic combo because of priority Psychic Terrain into Psy Spam with Expanding Force from Alakazam. I think Ditto can help bridge some of those options, where if someone else does have a strong Tailwind mode that they're bringing, you can bring Ditto to match that, but it's just not that reliable. And I think outside of that, Megas as frail as this, I really would like to see Redirection with, and that's just not on this roster.
I agree. And when I look at this team, I think there's not a lot of flexibility here. Most of these Pokemon are going to be running the same stuff. You do have a few things you could do, like Psychic Terrain, Expanding Force with Meowstic and Alakazam. You like Goldingo can run a few different sets, but overall, these Pokemon don't have a lot of moves they can bring, and I think that will come back to bite them.
I agree, and I think even within the context of the team, some of the Pokemon that are flexible in a vacuum aren't flexible here, whereas like a Nasty Plot Goldango set doesn't necessarily make sense on a team like this because you lack the fake out support and redirection of some of the other teams that Goldango is on. You mentioned it before, but it does feel like it might be relegated to that scarfed spread damage attacker who just tries to get a lot of HP taken out before it dies, rather than being able to fulfill a flexible role of either a relatively bulky pivot for something with a fighting weakness, or a setup sweeper, or a scarfed spread damage attacker on this roster, it feels like it's relegated to the third option only. And I feel like there's a lot of Pokemon like that where they're flexible in isolation, but on this team, it does feel very rigid. Next up, we have the Hot Ones. So another Mega Charizard Y team, this time with base Venusaur and paired alongside Sceptile as the other Mega.
Yeah, I think this definitely makes a little bit more sense as opposed to the last Mega Charizard WoW we looked at. You have Venusaur, you have Heliolisk. Even some Pokemon like Gliscor and Houndoom can work good in the sun because they're so weak to water typing. You have a decent redirection in Clefable, and then you have a very fast fake out and a good sweeper in Kingambit, which we haven't seen a ton of.
Yeah, I agree. And Clefable on this team, actually, I'm traditionally a Clefable hater. I feel like because this team covers its steel weakness with such raw fire damage, I actually like it a little bit more. I also, like you said, really like it alongside a setup sweeper like the Kingambit. You do have okay fake out support from the Weavile. I think Mega Sceptile loses a little bit of value on this roster just because the supporting cast does feel a lot more catered to something like Charizard. But with it being as frail as it is and fast as it is, it obviously does have decent synergy with the Clefable, and it does have a discharge mode with the Heliolisk. Overall, I think that this is a pretty solid team.
I agree. And one more thing I will point out is with Charizard losing Tailwind, your only Tailwind setter is Gliscor, and it's not the fastest or easiest Pokemon to help get it up. So your speed control is a little lackluster.
Yeah, very true. And this team, well, it does have Trick Room on Starmie, doesn't really have a Trick Room mode. And so something like Charizard, which is only at that base 100 speed tier, if it feels like a matchup where Venusaur can't take control with Chlorophyll, it does feel like it might be difficult to maintain speed control throughout the game and get opportunities to use that massive special attack stat. And so I think that you can add a couple more pieces here. Obviously, you have the Electro Web on the Heliolisk to help that problem, but I think in general, you might find yourself on the back foot in terms of speed control if you let the game get away from you at all. Overall, though, I think that this team is pretty solid, and I think it's relatively easy to execute because it has such strong synergies. I just think against maybe more complex teams or teams that have very hard speed control options, I think that this team might struggle a little bit. So next up, we have Histomix's team, the Sylvanic Harmonics. And I know that you helped Zach with this team, so I'll let you talk about that a little bit first.
Yeah, I mean, first off, he didn't really know what he wanted to play. He kind of just picked Basculegion and we kind of built around it. But I think there's a lot of good support around Basculegion, and I know that some people are not a fan of not having very strong, like heavy hitting mega options. But I think that Basculegion and Sylveon are some of the best, if not the best, non mega tier 1 Pokemon. And I think you just have a lot of good supports around it. Like, I think Mega Scovillain, beside Basculegion and Sylveon and Aerodactyl, is a very good Pokemon. You have a lot of good fake out support here, and you have one of the fastest Tailwind setters in Aerodactyl. So I think this team is pretty easy and pretty strong on paper.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And the combo of Sylveon, Mega Scovillain is definitely something that gave me problems on the ladder. Sylveon, obviously, its only big weaknesses are that it's very slow and it is not very physically bulky. And when you have something on the team that makes speed somewhat irrelevant because of redirection, and it's consistently burning all the physical attackers on the opposing side, it really does feel like a match made in heaven for Sylveon. And if you can make that headway early game, maybe Sylveon's able to trade 1-for-1 with a Hyper Beam. Then you have Basculegion coming in with stacks on Last Respects. It can start cleaning up. And then Mega Scovillain obviously does have longevity sets where it's running Leech Seed or Giga Drain to play into that late game. It does feel like this team's pacing throughout the course of the game is good, assuming that it has solid type matchups. I do worry about this team in instances where Sylveon maybe doesn't feel like it can come or doesn't feel the greatest offensively into Sun teams, for example, because then you don't have that much damage early game for Basculegion to kind of clean up that late game. But overall, I think that this team is pretty solid, and like you said, I think that it's very easy to use and it's very fundamentally sound.
I agree. There's a lot of good synergy here, and I know that me and him have talked about making a couple changes, so I think it will help out the team a lot as well.
Yeah, like for example, I think your Mega Steelix mode is a little bit weak. I'd like to see maybe a stronger Trick Room setter, but I do think that you packed a lot of value into this one, and I do think that your main modes are quite strong.
I agree.
So next up we have AZ Flow State. So another Mega Floette team, but not solo Mega Floette. This time it's paired with Mega Skarmory.
Obviously, Floette is one of the better megas in the format. You have a lot of good support around Floette. Sneasler, Skarmory, and Ariados are very good supports for Mega Floette. And then you have some screen options with Klefki. You have a Scarf, Typhlosion, or Life Orb, whatever set you want to run. And Mamoswine is pretty strong as well here. I think you have probably the best partners for Floette in the entire format.
Yeah, I completely agree. I obviously did the pro cons list for this one. I think for the price, Ariados is the best Floette partner. It's not close. I think Sneasler, obviously, like you said, one of the best fake out supports with how fast it is. And then I think having a secondary mega option in Skarmory to deter people from bringing opposing fairies, which is something that I personally had a big knock on for Floette teams, is that Fairy Aura is not exclusive to Floette if you know that it's coming. And so you can bring your own fairies, which get buffed by it, but also have their own abilities, which can have multiplicative effects. Skarmory just demolishes opposing fairies, and so I think that that's a really solid pairing as a secondary mega.
I agree. And to bring back up what you wrote as pros and cons, this team does not have the greatest speed control. You have Tailwind with Skarmory and you have Trick Room with Malamar, but they're not the best setters. So I think most weeks you won't even be running speed control with this team, which could be a little weak compared to some of the other teams we've seen.
Yeah, you do have things like, as I discussed on the Meowstick previously, you do have Prankster Thunderwave, you do have something like Electroweb Jolteon, you do have potentially Scarfers on your team that can mitigate the speed problem in Typhlosion and Mamoswine, but overall the speed control is quite weak, and against some of these hyper offensive teams who can, for example, a Whimsicott Charizard team, if that was to come on, they can just click Tailwind and then start stacking spread damage. This team feels like it does have to play a little bit more methodical in its sequences because it lacks those speed control elements.
I agree. I think overall this team is pretty strong and it could be pretty easy to use each week.
So next up, we have the Cleveland Crabs. And so I know we both helped Toucan out with this team a little bit, so I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of our first picks was the Alolan Ninetales, and I think we picked up really good partners around that. Like, he wanted to use Arcanine as it's one of his favorite Pokemon. But Mega Kangaskhan, Melodic, Noivern, Gallade, Diggersby, Rotomo, like all these Pokemon are really good value picks for their tiers. And you can use Trick Room or Tailwind depending on what you're against each week. And I think these Pokemon are very flexible and very easy to use.
Yeah, and I think similar to what we spoke with about Trim's team, I think the non-mega core of this team is so strong and it's packed with so much value that I really like having two megas that, while they can deal damage, are also very supportive and easy to execute in nature. Mega Kangaskhan, like we said, has very strong fake out control because it has Scrappy in its base form and hits so hard in its mega form. Its speed tiering is really easy to use. Mega Banette, very similarly, right? It does have access to a monstrous 165 attack stat and ghost type moves, but it can also function in a more supportive role with Prankster Encore, Prankster Will-O-Wisp, that Prankster Disruption that can let some of these stronger non-megas run away with the game.
I agree. And to bring up one of the cons that you wrote down, this team does not have any redirection, but I also don't think that this is a team that is needing it a lot because you don't have a ton of setup. You have one strong fake out user in Kangaskhan. So I think this team, if it's on the field, it's going to hit and it's going to hit pretty hard.
I agree, and it's also designed in a way where if you don't have a good type matchup across the board from you, you likely have something in the back that can swap into that matchup favorably. And so it is pseudo balance in that regard, but it also has tail room aspects to it. I think this team is really strong and I think it's really easy to execute. And I think that this team is going to do well. Next up, we have the Golden State Waikokos. So this is Biss's team, which I helped him out a little bit in draft. I think that, like we touched on earlier in the format, I think Mega Lucario is one of the best tier 2s if you have the correct support for it because its damage output is so high. And I think that a support core of Incin, Rotom Wash, and Sinistra is fantastic for it, with Incin obviously providing you fake out support to get your setup down, Rotom Wash obviously being a great ground pivot for both Incin and Lucario, and then Sinistra providing both healing to the bulk up sets or redirection to the more frail Swords Dance sets. I think that the top tier picks of this team have a really strong core. I think where this team can struggle a little bit is, for example, in its Trick Room mode. It does have good Trick Room value, but the sequencing isn't necessarily the easiest thing. Overall, I think that this team is pretty solid and I think it has good value. I do worry about how it meshes together as a whole roster of 11, but I think that there is good value and I think it does have good modes. I expect this team to do well, but I think that there might be a few trades that needed to be made.
I agree. I'm not the biggest fan of a single fake out Pokemon in Trick Room. I think a few of these Pokemon can be ran in and outside of Trick Room as well. Like you can run Scarf Vanillux, or you could run it as a sweeper under Trick Room. You have a decent Tailwind Setter and Staraptor, and overall, this team, I think these Pokemon are very easy to use, and I think it's relatively strong.
Yeah, the only parts that I worry about this team are, like, for example, Oranguru and Drampaw were something that Cybertron featured on the ladder. It was something that was less known at the time, and so I think it caught a lot of people off guard. But in draft, if you're bringing things consistently and people have time to prep for it, maybe it's not the strongest because you can't just protect setup Trick Room because they know that Oranguru is going to be your Trick Room setter, or Slowbro potentially as well. They're both weak to dark. So I think that the Trick Room mode on this team could use some work, but I think that the Mega Lucario setup mode on this team is extremely strong and I love it.
I agree. I'm a big fan of some of these Pokemon.
All right, next up we have the Snowpoint Capybara as piloted by Forest.
To me, this looks like a not a standard rain team, but you normally see Dragonite with rain. You have a Prankstermon and Liepard, and overall, this team is pretty good in rain. You have the Basculegion female, which is not as strong as male, but it's still very strong and can definitely work. You have Mega Manectric. Aegislash is good in rain. I do worry about Arcanine. I worry about its synergy with the rest of these Pokemon. But overall, I think this team, you kind of just want to set up Rain and then go from there.
Yeah, you also do have a few secondary modes where Aegislash and Dragonite have good typing to where Dragonite can kind of mitigate some of the threats that Aegislash is weak to while it sets up, and then vice versa. You do have Liepard Side Swagger with Lumberry Unburdened stuff with the Slurpuff and the Sceptile, which is something that I was prepping for in my draft but didn't end up taking. I do think base Manectric having Lightning Rod support for a lot of these Pokemon is good as well. And I actually think, interestingly enough, the Basculegion female might be more flexible in a draft format for a team like this, just because that Scarfed Surf spread damage can hit very hard.
I do worry about the speed tiering with this team. Like, you do have good speed tiers, but the speed control, I guess. Dragonite's the only Tailwind setter here, and you only have a single fake out, like I said before. I think you set up Rain and you go from there, but it's going to be a little difficult depending on your opponent because your Pokemon are so fast that you kind of want Tailwind and you don't want anyone to set up Trick Room. But I think it's going to be a little difficult for you to stop anyone from setting up Trick Room.
Yeah, and obviously do have some techs here like Liepard Copycat, if they don't use a Prankster move on the other side, can reverse Trick Room at +1 priority, which is a really interesting interaction. But for example, if somebody else uses a priority move before Liepard can move in Trick Room, then you'll copycat that and you'll be stuck into it. And so I agree, I think this team can suffer a little bit against some harder Trick Room teams, but overall I like the composition. I think that it's a bit inflexible, but I think that it is pretty easy to use and it does bake in some good synergies. So
I agree.
next up we have the Missouri Miniors, piloted by Zephyr. So this is, interestingly, this is pretty different from the other Gardevoir teams that we've seen, in that I think this team has a real Gardevoir Trick Room mode,
Mhm.
whereas the other Gardevoir teams that we've seen throughout the format, it kind of feels like it's more of the Tailwind option. But here, with the fake out support from Scrafty, with the redirection from Mousehold, it does feel like you do have a genuine Trick Room option with the Gardevoir, but you also obviously have the fast option with Talonflame. And so I think this is one of the few teams where I feel confident in saying that this is a good Mega Gardevoir team.
Yeah, even with that being said, though, I think that the rest of the Pokemon around it, outside of Mousehold and maybe a speed boosted Mega Scolipede, is going to be pretty difficult to use in Tailwind. I think a lot of these Pokemon are just too slow for Tailwind from Talonflame. I think Mega Gardevoir is one of the weaker zeros as well. So it's in terms of execution, this team is pretty easy to use. I just worry about the kind of like you said speed sandwich before, like you have a lot of fast or a lot of slow Pokemon, but only a couple fast Pokemon. So I think it could be a little difficult to use.
I agree, but I do think when you're picking a tier 0, I would rather have somebody pick options that support the tier 0 and then have somewhat lack of synergy with the lower tier mons than vice versa. And so I think that while Mega Gardevoir is the only thing that can run with Talonflame, I think Talonflame is the only component you need for the Tailwind mode. And so I do think within a group of 6 that you're bringing, it does still feel like you can bring a cohesive 6 that both operate in Tailwind and Trick Room. Like, for example, for a Tailwind mode, you could still have Scrafty for Fake Out, Tailwind, and Intimidate pivots alongside Gardevoir, Talonflame, and Mousehold. Farigiraf's obviously not useless in Tailwind either because of its ability to block priority once you have Tailwind up. But I do agree with you in some capacity that something like Mega Camerupt can never really play in Tailwind, and so it is relegated to that Trick Room mode. But I do think you have a lot of flexible pieces here outside of the Mega options that can do both. And so I think it'll be really interesting to see how this team gets piloted throughout the season. Alright, and kicking us off with Group 8, we have Slowpoke. So a Mega Mawile, Mega Greninja team, which ironically is what I ran last season, and I glued them together with a Raichu for Lightning Rod support, Speed Swap support for Mawile, but obviously we're not playing Nat decks anymore, and this team has Talonflame to kind of support the Greninja mode, and then Oranguru and Reuniclus for the Trick Room mode.
Yeah, this is another team where I wonder if these Pokemon are just too fast outside of just a few for Trick Room. I think your Trick Room mode is definitely worse than your Tailwind mode. You have Dragonite, Greninja, and Prankster, Liepard, Talonflame. Like, all these Pokemon do not want to be in Trick Room. So I think while you are flexible with being able to run either one each week, I think one is definitely worse than the other.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and I think that part of that is because of the redundant roles that you have here. Like, instead of an Oranguru or Reuniclus, I'd rather see you pick one of those and then maybe go with a Scrafty, for example. Or I really think that this team is lacking slow fake out support, something that can help you set up the Trick Room, but then also benefits from it, because the sequencing on the Trick Room side does feel like it's going to be pretty difficult to do. Overall, though, I think that this team is pretty solid for what it is, but I do think that it could be significantly better with a few adjustments made on the roster. For example, I think something like Dragonite is a bit redundant to Talonflame. It's okay as a physical attacker, but it's predominantly a bulky Tailwind setter, which is kind of the same role of what Talonflame is going to do on this team. You don't have redirection on this team. It does feel like there's good pieces here, but I feel like you're missing the few finishing touches to make this team really reach its potential.
I agree. I would like to see them drop a couple Pokemon and pick up some better ones, but I think overall this team is very flexible, and you really don't know what they're going to run each week.
Next up, we have Aish's team. So a Mega Scovillain, Mega Drampaw team.
When I look at this team, I just see a lot of Pokemon that don't synergize very well. You obviously have the Mega Skull Villain and Annihilate combo. It's kind of the same as the Mousehold combo from back in the day. Obviously, it's not as good, but you have some Pokemon that just don't fit very well here. Like Venusaur outside of Sun is not the strongest Pokemon. I think Gengar and Gardevoir kind of fulfill similar roles. So I do wonder how strong this team really can be.
Yeah, it does feel like Mega Villain is going to have to shoulder a lot of the burden on this one. It's not like some of the Mega Villain teams we've seen before where you have overwhelming damage alongside of it. This does feel like a pretty bulky roster where maybe Mega Villain can operate in more of an offensive role but still have that redirection capability. But I do worry about this team's ability to punch through some of these walls that we do have in the format just because it doesn't have the best damage.
In terms of ease of execution, I think this is one of the harder teams we have seen. This is definitely going to be a team that just depends on the user and how good they are, I think.
I agree, because even for your Trick Room modes, for example, I think Mega Drampa is a great Trick Room Mega option for its value, but your Trick Room setters are going to be Gardevoir and Gengar, which are not necessarily the easiest Pokemon to sequence off the field once they've set Trick Room. Scrafty notably doesn't have Parting Shot in Champions anymore, and so I do think there's good pieces here and there's good value, but I think that the sequencing and ultimately the damage is going to be really difficult. Next up, we have Schmidt's team. So you have Mega Blastoise alongside Vivillon, which is a great combo. Blastoise and Hatterene is a great combo. And then you also have a Disquake mode with the Mamoswine and the Rotom. I think Schmidt's got a lot of good pieces here.
Yeah, pretty notably, Mega Blastoise is the only Mega on this team. So I do think in terms of flexibility, the fact that you kind of have to bring Blastoise every week brings it down just a little bit. But overall, I think a lot of these Pokemon can run different things, even though like most of the time they will be running similar sets as they normally do. Like we said before, Goldingo has a few options, and this time you actually have a fast Tailwind setter with it. So I think that the Nasty Plot variant could be very good here. And you do have a Trick Room mode as well with Hatterene. And you have two fake outs, notably one of them being Blastoise. But overall, this team can be pretty flexible. And I think you just have some strong picks here.
I agree. I think that this team is really easy to execute on the weeks where it's good. I do feel like it might run into some issues against teams that have answers to its straightforward linear lines. Obviously, we're recording this after Schmidt and I have already played. I had a horrible matchup into him, and I didn't really feel like I had many options to play the game. I feel like this is one of those teams where if you do have good matchups, they're great matchups, but I do feel like some of the matchups where you don't get to use those speed control options or you don't get to use those disruption options because you're the one playing on the back foot, it might feel a little bit more difficult to play a roster like this. Just because you do need those setup turns to get going, I feel like against more offensive rosters that start from turn 1 or even turn 0, this team might fall a little flat.
I agree. Overall, I think it's pretty easy team to use. It just depends on your opponent.
I agree. I think this team's pretty solid. So next up we have Wicked's team. So another Mega Staraptor team, and he's actually paired it with Mega Alakazam.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of Mega Staraptor. I think here you have some good Pokemon around it, but I don't think you have an amazing support for your Mega Pokemon. Obviously, Klefki has some supportive options with it, but overall, I think you're kind of just you're banking on Staraptor to be able to set up it for itself with a close combat, and I think in some weeks that could be pretty difficult to use. Obviously, that's why you have two Mega Pokemon, but I also think Mega Alakazam is not the strongest secondary Mega. So this team looks pretty easy to use, but I do wonder about a few of the matchups they might run into.
I agree. And we did see, obviously, as you played it, some Mega Staraptor teams on ladder where it was paired with almost no supports on a hyper offensive roster where you're pairing it with other huge threats that are applying so much pressure that Mega Staraptor is not the main villain who has all of the focus on it. And so I feel like that could be some of the what's at play here with the Garchomp. You do have Intimidate Deterrent on turn 0 with the Corviknight. You do have Lightning Rod support with the Pikachu and Redirection with Scovillain. And so I think you do have good pieces here. But as you said, you don't have something that's so unbelievably broken as a pairing like a Whimsicott, for example. There's a lot of B tier pairings here where you have solid synergy, but there's nothing that's inherently overpowered. They're all very honest pairings. They're not cheat codes.
I agree. And if you look at that perceived power, this is one of the strongest teams we have seen in terms of just power picks. Most, if not all, these Pokemon were picked in another group. So this team is very strong. You have some of the best value picks in the format with Farigiraf, Garchomp, even Lycanroc as a tier 5 is very good value. So I do think this team is very strong. I think it's pretty frail, but overall, it's going to be pretty easy to use. And I think it could be a matchup where it's pretty hard to prep for sometimes.
I agree. And I think this is one of those teams where it likely has such strong power picks and is so relatively easy to use that a player of lower skill can take some wins off of better quote unquote opponents. I think that this is a team you could upset some people with for sure.
I agree.
All right, next up we have BP's team. And so BP was a late add to our group, and so he did kind of get pigeonholed into what was left, as Rukole pretty much hadn't picked anything through the first 8 rounds. And so the pieces that he was left with made for a perfect Rancor, and he kind of ran with that.
Yeah, I think this is probably one of the easier rain teams that we have seen that you could use. Obviously, Arch and Pelipper is a strong pairing. I think Electros in Rain is pretty good, and then you have a Swift Swim Pokemon in Overquill, which we haven't seen a ton of. I think Overquill is pretty annoying as a Pokemon, but overall, I think this team is pretty easy to use, and you have some good options here to be able to run Tailwind or Trick Room with either one of your Megas.
I agree, and I think you touched on Overquill. Some of the issues that we've had with the Rain teams previously that we've reviewed is the overlapping types that end up on Rain teams, where you end up with so many water types because you want to cram in as many weather abusers as you can possibly get. Here, your stab distribution for Rain abusers is fantastic, right? Overquill is a dark poison type. You have Dragon, Electric, and Steel effectively from Arch. You have water and flying from Pelipper. Electros is another electric user, but obviously it's in a different capacity. It can run physical, it can run coverage sets. I think this is one of the best rain teams that we've seen in terms of stab distribution of its quote unquote abusers. And so I think that that's really solid.
I agree. And I do like a couple of these Pokemon here. Like, I do think Clefable is a good follow me user in Rain. Obviously, I said that there is a Trick Room mode here. I think with Slowbro being your only Trick Room setter effectively is going to be a little hard for you to run Trick Room some weeks. But if you can get it up, I mean, Golurk is a very strong Trick Room user, and you can even run Electros in Trick Room some weeks as well.
Agreed. I think it's at that middling speed tier where it's not going to burn you in either aspect, but it is flexible in that it can run in either mode. So I expect this team to do well. It's honestly the best rain team that we've seen from my perspective, and so I think that this team is going to be pretty solid. So ironically, we haven't seen many rain teams throughout the format, and we have another one in the same group here with Thanoscar.
And this is the first and only Mega Swampert team that we have here.
Yeah, I'm personally not that big of a fan of Mega Swampert. I think for something that is a tier 0, having a quad weakness and being conditional on weather control in a draft format does feel very difficult. That being said, though, in MB, the team that I ran the most was a Mega Swampert team, and so I can definitely speak to its strength. I just worry that its weaknesses are going to be focused on very hard in a draft sense. And I know, for example, even Squirrely was saying that he just stopped playing ladder altogether because once Swampert got popular, people were running grass moves on everything, and I can attest to that. It was very annoying, very difficult to play. And on a team like this, your other Mega is your only redirector, and so it doesn't necessarily feel the easiest to play, especially when you know it's coming. And so I do worry a little bit about the flexibility of this team and how you can switch it up for your opponents, because it does feel very straightforward.
I agree. I think this is going to be a very difficult team to pilot each week. Obviously, Thanos Carr is not a very bad player. I was in his group last season, and I know that he did make playoffs. I just worry about his team being so weak compared to everyone else's in the group. And even if he does make playoffs, even in playoffs, I think this team can be very difficult to use. So I would like to see there be some changes made here.
Yeah, I agree. It does feel like a lot of the picks made here were potential fringe Lone Star picks, where, like you said, Mega Swampert, this is the only one that we've seen. We haven't seen very many Mega Clefables. We haven't seen many Cofagricuses. Base Rotom. There's a lot of very unique picks on this team. And ultimately, that means that the perception is that they're not worth picking and not particularly strong. But it'll be interesting to see how Thanoscar can pilot this team and maybe prove people wrong and turn people onto some of these picks. So, next up we have my team, which, spoiler alert, I got rocked week 1, and I made my trades even before week 1, because in prep I realized how much of an Achilles heel that my team had. But we're going to review everything as they were post-Grace, and so take it away, Hunter. Roast me.
I mean, obviously you made some changes, and I think those changes are very good for you. But looking at this team straight up, you have a very glaring weakness to the ground typing. I do think you have a very strong Perish mode. I do think it's stronger now that you have made a few changes. Incineroar, Ninetales, those are some of the best Pokemon to pair with Gengar, and you even see it in some tournaments and on ladder, like those three as a team. Tinkaton is a very good value pick for a tier 3. I'm a big fan of Palafin. I know that it is no longer here for you, but I think Palafin is one of the strongest non-mega tier 2s in the format, and I do think overall there are some good synergies here, but I do think that they were made better after your trades.
Yeah, obviously, big con here. Weakness to ground. That was exploited pretty badly in my week 1 matchup. The other thing here, too, is my thought process going into it was that Ninetales would be good into my opposing ground matchups. I thought that my Megas would be great into opposing ground types because they both resist and are immune to it. Mamoswine was kind of the perfect storm for my week 1 matchup. It had Ice Shard to threaten Mega Sceptile, Icicle Crash to threaten Howlucha, and obviously Earthquake to threaten the rest of my team, while also not being weak to ice itself for Ninetales. And so after that nightmare, I did make a few trades, but I think for me, this team is really strong, but I worry if I crammed too many ladder teams into it and didn't really think about the flexibility that goes into a draft format, because I have been spending so much time playing champions this season. But I think for what I ended up with, I think it's a really solid team, and I think once that I learned to pilot it a bit better, I think that this team is going to be really hard to stop.
I agree. I think it's pretty strong on paper.
Next up, we have Rain's team. So a Mega Floette, Mega Dragalge, Mega Lucario team.
Again, we've seen this a bunch with the champions teams. The perceived power is the highest it can be here. Many, if not all, these Pokemon were picked in other groups, and I think that Floette here has very good secondary mega options with Lucario and Dragalge. I think those two Pokemon fit Floette's weaknesses very well here.
I agree, and I think that while they fulfill different roles, I think the supports that they want aren't necessarily that different. Each one of them does want a redirector in some capacity. Each one of them does benefit from Sableye. Each one of them does like fake out support and intimidate support. And so I think while they operate in very different niches as megas, I think that the supporting cast here actually meshes pretty well, which is not something that we can say about a lot of teams in the format. A lot of teams that try to switch it up with the niches that their megas can fill end up with a supporting cast where it feels like they only support one mega while the rest of the cast supports the other, or vice versa. But I think that this team is really solid in that I can see any mix of these 11 Pokemon coming on a given week, and I don't think that I would be surprised.
I agree. The biggest issue for me is the lack of speed control here. You have a couple fast Pokemon with Arcanine and Lucario and Raichu, but the rest of this team is pretty slow, and you kind of want to run Trick Room with a few of these Pokemon, but you only have one Trick Room setter in Trevenant, and then Gliscor is your only Tailwind setter, and they're not the easiest Pokemon to set up those two speed controls. So I do think that is probably the biggest weakness here.
Yeah, and I think because of that, a lot of the load ends up falling to both Sableye and Ariados. Sableye because it can obviously disrupt opponents. It has Will-O-Wisp. It has screens. Ariados obviously because it's the sole redirector on this squad with a lot of setup Pokemon. And so I think you're gonna have to get good value out of Sableye and Ariados. Otherwise, I worry that this team might not have enough gas to get set up before they can start steamrolling. Next up, we have Sominoing's team. And so I've touched on it a few times, so I'm going to fangirl out a little bit. I love Mega Pyroar Sun, and this was going to be my backup plan if Mega Gengar was not there. I played it extensively on ladder. I think Torkoal, Pyroar, Scrafty, Vileplume is a great core here. Obviously, you're missing out a little bit on the Farigiraf, but you do have other Trick Room setters. I think that this team is really, really solid, and I think it's really easy to play.
You have a very strong Trick Room mode, and you have a lot of good defensive pivots for your Mega Pokemon. Aegislash is very good for both Pyroar and Scrafty to switch into. I do worry about a few of these Pokemon, like kind of filling similar roles. Ceruledge could be something different here because you have so many fire types, but maybe you just want a lot of fire types in Sun. But overall, I think this team is pretty strong. I do worry about the non-Trick Room mode, but other than that, I think it's pretty easy to play.
Yeah, I think when comparing it to the latter variant that did have Farigiraf, it does feel like Mega Pyroar maybe is missing a few components to support it in that faster mode, like you said. Obviously, Farigiraf can block the priority. We don't have that here. There's not a very strong Tailwind mode here to support it in that regard either. I think you do have Quick Guard access on Gallade, but that's pretty much it. And so I do think shifting slightly away from that Trick Room mode as your primary and giving more supportive options to the Pyroar. Like you said, Ceruledge is a tier 2 pick, I believe, that has some great Tailwind options in it. Maybe you could pick those up. But overall, this is a solid team, and it's going to be really easy to execute, so expected to pick up a decent amount of wins. And last but not least, we have Futuristic Ninja's team, which is a Mega Frostlass Mega Beedrill team, which, spoiler, he has since dropped Mega Beedrill. Very sad. I know it's his favorite Pokemon, but we haven't seen many Frostlass teams in the format, so.
Yeah, I mean, I think Mega Frostlass is one of the most underrated Pokemon in the format. I know that I have used it a bunch on ladder. I wonder about its fit here. I think it's very strong. And with Whimsicott, Milotic, Crocodile, I think those are good pairings alongside it. But you kind of have a lot of Pokemon here that want to do the same thing. I think obviously Vanillux and Frostlass both set up Snow. I would like to see Vanillux being a different Pokemon here. And I think Mudsdale and Aggron kind of fulfill the same role as well. But I think overall, this team looks pretty easy to play. You kind of just click Prankster Tailwind with Whimsicott, and you could set up with Melodic Frostlass, or you could just start hitting pretty hard right off the bat.
I do think you lose a little bit of the flexibility of having Frostlass as this Aurora Veil support for some of these bulkier non-Mega Pokemon. Obviously, you have the Milotic, but people have paired it with King Gambit, for example. I know Wolfie took in his draft league. Outside of the Milotic, it doesn't feel like it really has much value clicking Aurora Veil here, and so it is relegated to kind of that Blizzard Shadow Ball mode. And so I kind of understand the Vanillux where you're saying, all right, this is very straightforward. I'm clicking Blizzard, and people are going to try to overwrite the weather on me. Well, I'm going to overwrite it right back and keep the pressure up. So I kind of understand it in that regard. But it does make it easier to know what's coming, right? Because what's good into Frostlass is ultimately what's good into Vanillux. And so it does feel like what this team is good at, it's great at, but what this team is bad at, it's extremely bad at.
Yeah, I think it has some pretty big glaring weaknesses too. Like the fighting type is pretty strong into this team. Obviously, Frostlass is not weak to it because it's Ghost type, and I think something like a Mega Lucario could be a real big issue for this team outside of Milotic, of course. Obviously, that's one Pokemon, only one person in each group can have it. But I think just as an example, something like that could be very bad for this team to play against. So I would like to see a few changes here. You said that he dropped the Mega Beedrill. I do think that dropping it was the right play, and I think this team is very interesting to see.
Yeah, and I think you touched on the Mega Lucario. I think if this team gets to play off something like, for example, Mega Lopunny from your side, or if other people have a Pangoro, that scrappy fighting type stab can go really hard into this team because not only do you have not have Frostlass as a pivot into those fighting weaknesses because Scrappy circumvents ghost typing, but Frostlass is also weak to it itself. And so I think that something like that can be really problematic. And so I agree with you. I think that some trades as far as the defensive type chart goes might help this team operate a little easier. But with that being said, that does bring us to the conclusion of the champions groups. Appreciate all of you who watched, and thank you for being here with us at PokePeak.